Welcome to the Center Collaborative, Creative Solutions in Behavioral Health and Criminal Justice, brought to you by the Oregon Center on Behavioral Health and Justice Integration, which is also known as the Center. We at the Center are all about solutions. Our job in Oregon is to facilitate improvement of the system so behavioral health and criminal justice can work better together to engage people in treatment while promoting public safety. I am your host, Chris Thomas. I hold a master's degree in clinical psychology and have focused on the intersection between behavioral health and criminal justice for 20 years. Over 7 of those years were behind the walls of a maximum security prison. During this podcast, you will have the opportunity to sit in on real, in-depth conversations with experts about complex topics in a way that is both fascinating and digestible. We will focus not just on what is wrong with the system, but what is going right and how we can work together to evolve. This podcast is a conversation in a series of conversations where we touch on people's legal rights and their options related to seeking medical care. Since our conversations are intended for informational and educational purposes only, they are not a substitute for or a reason to delay seeking professional legal or medical advice. In this episode, Rod Harwood, Older Adult Coordinator for Greater Oregon Behavioral Health Incorporated, GOBI, joins me to talk about the growing aging population in the U.S., how dementia impacts the senses and the brain. He shares practical tips on how to provide accommodations when communicating with someone with dementia. We talk about the suicide rate among older adults, what you can do to mitigate the impacts of dementia, and the need to maintain connection and meaning throughout the lifespan. I learned so much during my conversation with Rod. I think you will too. Welcome to our conversation. We are thrilled to have you on the podcast today, Rod. Thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
I think it may be helpful to talk about what you do at GOBI and then how that fits in with the work we do. So I know that you're part of a statewide initiative. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, the state of Oregon recognized that we have a lot of older adults in our state and those with disabilities. And in fact, if you haven't noticed, there are more of us every day. In this country, there are 10,000 individuals turning 65 every day. That baby boomer cohort, which I am a part of, is the fastest growing sector in the U.S. population. And by 2030, they expect that 1 in 5 Americans will be 65 and older. And at age 75, it's the fastest growing cohort among older adults in general. So with that 2030 1 in 5, many of the rural frontier counties in which I serve, 1 in 3 individuals in that county are 65 and older already.
Oh, wow.
You can imagine how that impacts services, finding individuals to fill positions. Difficult because a lot of those baby boomers are retiring. And then yet at the same time, those baby boomers are living in your community and are in need of services, and you need to be able to respond to them. So again, the initiative recognized that this population is a growing population, not only in this country, but in the state. And so they set up this initiative to help coordinate and address those needs. And basically the initiative is tasked with 3 things. One is to build collaboration amongst the community partners that are serving older adults. So that's everything from what we know, like the Aging People with Disabilities, to your area agencies on aging, to your behavioral health, but it's also the first responders. It's the folks that work at the grocery store. It's everybody. Our job is to just get out there, serve someone they know, and trying to figure out who to get a hold of and reach out to. Part of our job is to help educate and help them make those connections. And it's done in a variety of ways, and each community. The second area that we are responsible for is to provide complex case consultation. If any of these different entities need some help with consultation, or even if a family member sometimes needs consultations, they have a loved one that's living with dementia, we can help provide some consultation on helping them know what's going on with their loved one and maybe who to connect with and what's the best next step. And then finally, our job is to provide education to the workforce. So we provide a lot of different education opportunities to the workforce on a variety of different topics to help them do their job better. That's why I end up doing the crisis intervention training with first responders. We also provide education to community members as well, the very population that we're talking about. And in this virtual reality, I'm able to do that for people from across the region. And in fact, even this week, doing 2 virtual trainings or supports. One of them is a care partner support series for family members that are caring for their loved ones that are living with dementia. And then another time this week, I'll be actually leading people through a grief support series as well. And people are joining in from their homes throughout the region. So that's just an example, again, what the initiative does. It started in 2015. I joined it in 2016. And there are, again, 24 of us across the region.
Really important work for our region and statewide. In the work that I do around this intersection of behavioral health and criminal justice, there's a lot of conversation around when folks are experiencing psychiatric diagnoses, but there isn't as much conversation on a statewide level around when folks are experiencing intellectual and developmental disabilities or neurocognitive concerns. So I'm really excited to have you here, Rod, to be able to heighten some awareness around the older adult population and the specialized accommodations that folks should keep in mind. Thank you so much. I know you do training with our crisis intervention teams, and we appreciate that. I'm wondering if it may be helpful for our listeners to spend some time talking about, either for first responders or for judges, attorneys, behavioral health, when they're working with folks who are older, what kind of accommodations may they want to keep in mind when they're working with folks that may not occur to them off the top of their heads?
So the fact is, we're all getting older. And so we can draw from what that experience is like. But again, part of the training I end up doing with first responders is what we refer to as an older adult experience. We experience muscle loss, and as we get older, it can affect our balance. All of us fall at times. I know I do. But as you get older, those falls can be deadly. In fact, as you get older, if you do fall, there's a greater chance that it's going to lead to permanent damage and possibly death. So when you're working with those older adults and trying to help them, be very sensitive to that. So that's just one example. But some other examples, and just in terms of communication, for instance, hearing loss. Hearing loss is a huge thing, and it increases all the time. In fact, I was looking at some statistics recently. By age 60, 1 in 4 individuals are experiencing some form of hearing loss. By age 70 to 79, half of individuals are experiencing some form of hearing loss, and it just goes up from there. So if you're interacting with them and you're speaking to them, and they're looking at you, they may not be picking up everything you're saying. And if you're a first responder, it might be in a crisis situation, it's really important that they see you, they see your face as you're communicating with them, because they're relying not just in the actual words you're saying, but the expressions in your face, maybe some physical cues that you're providing them. Just because they're nodding their head and smiling does not mean they understand what you're saying. You may be in a position of authority and they're just wanting to respect you and not let on necessarily that they are not picking up on everything you're saying. So it's really important that you find multiple ways to communicate with them. And that's just one example of deficits that older adults are experiencing. They're experiencing chronic pain too. And as a result of that, it really hinders their mobility. It affects their mood. And there's a phrase I love, pain that's not transformed is transmitted. And if they're hurting all the time, how you're interacting with them may trigger a response that you don't necessarily like. And you're going, what's going on there? They may be having other issues going on there that you need to be more sensitive to.
And it could be, too, things that you usually do in your process,
Mm-hmm.
depending on what kind of pain someone is experiencing, could heighten that pain and then escalate the situation.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
I'm wondering, too, Rod, about opiate use with older adults experiencing so much chronic pain. That may be another way that folks may be interacting with first responders, is that they've gotten prescriptions and accidentally overdosed. I'm wondering if that's something that folks are seeing as well and that you hear about.
Well, there is some of that, but at the same time, the challenge is we can see individuals on multiple medications. We're talking 10, 20 different medications. They're things that they're taking. Their medical provider may not be aware of all of them because they're taking over the counter stuff. And then one drug ends up having a side effect because it's mixed with another drug and so on. That's certainly having an impact as well. Also, a huge challenge for older adults is alcohol, because when you think about socially, we have these guardrails up when we're out in the public and we have a job. So if we have a 9 to 5 job, you may not be having that beer or whatever that is until after work. But now you're not working anymore. And those rhythms and routines you have where you didn't have that beer or whatever until, let's say, 5 o'clock in the evening or something like that. Now you're moving it up to earlier, where eventually you're having that first thing in the morning and then another one and another one. And along with that too is the social isolation that takes place, which then compounds it even more. But yeah, thinking about how the alcohol can affect the medications, but also you end up having this alcohol abuse problem that maybe you never had before. And as a member in the community, paying attention to those older adults, noticing those patterns of change. Maybe you used to see them showing up at the coffee shop. Maybe you used to see them being at the grocery store, and they're not there anymore because they're also experiencing more losses. And as you get older, you experience more losses. And how well are they coping and working through those losses? When people experience grief, no matter who they are, when they don't process that grief and work through it, we call grief work, and experience mourning, that grief ends up turning into depression. That leads to a whole nother area, suicide. The suicide rate for older adults goes up. The older adult suicide rates in Oregon, 24.3 per 100,000. 65 to 75 experience suicide. 75 to 84, it's 29.1.
Mm-hmm.
85 and above, it's 33.3.
Oh, wow.
So you can see how those numbers, they go up. You can imagine being an older adult, all of your friends have passed away.
Yeah.
The thing that got you out of bed in the morning for 40 years is no longer there. The thing that gave you an identity and a role in the community is no longer there. So you could see how that can very much impact your mental health. But we have a lot of older adults that are resilient. They find new meaning and purpose in their life and are vibrant, active members in their community. So that's not everyone, but there's still that population out there that are isolated and alone because that isolation and loneliness leads to greater health issues and death for older adults.
I can imagine, too, the last 2 years has only added to that situation.
Yes, it's definitely had a huge impact on mental health. Of course, when you look at that with the care facilities,
Mm-hmm.
those individuals who, when you think about independence, because of their health issues, some of the things we've just talked about in terms of mobility and stuff, they're not able to necessarily get out. They have to rely on others to drive them. And then with the shutdown, in order to help them not be exposed to this terrible pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
it led to other health issues, both cognitively and physically with them.
So I can imagine that there's probably going to be an increase, at least temporarily, after the pandemic, of seeing more concerns in the community than we did before, even more heightened concerns. I think that this was a great piece of the conversation that we don't really talk about, the issues around pain, depression, loss, and grief, and how those all roll together. So to circle back, what other pieces should folks be looking out for that we didn't have a chance to talk about?
Well, if you're first responders, if you're judges, if you're law enforcement, you know this, but I think it's important for us to just keep our focus on it, and that's elder abuse. The mistreatment of older adults, which results in harm or loss in some way. And that abuse can be physical, it can be mental, it could be neglect, or it can be exploitation. And unfortunately, it's lots of times by individuals that are supposed to be there to support these individuals. So it may be that niece that's supposed to be helping take care of grandma may be stealing from her or taking those medications out of the cabinet and selling them. But grandma's not going to say anything because the shame of that. So she'll endure that abuse. The other factor is you mentioned earlier about cognitive decline. Again, first off, 70% of those living with dementia are out in the community, and 70% of them haven't even been diagnosed yet. And what they've noted is many older adults that have succumbed to some of these scams by phone and so on, they actually were able to determine later that they had some form of dementia. But in the early stages, that wasn't identified. But because their cognitive center, part of their brain that would say, this doesn't quite sound right, is compromised. And what's referred to is the boss of lots of times the amygdala, which is that part of the brain that focuses on fright, flight, fight, takes over. So they hear maybe, oh, your granddaughter, and they just picked me up. I'm in jail, and I need you to send some money, Grandma, so I can get out. And Grandma does that right away. That sort of things. And law enforcement hears about this all the time. But here's the deal. If you're a first responder and you're responding to different situations and you're noticing signs of possible physical signs of abuse, such as injuries that are not explained, painful wounds, cuts, bruises, things like that, dehydration, malnutrition, all those sorts of things. And then maybe behavioral signs where they show a lot of fear and anxiety, agitation, isolation, things like that. Need to take note of that. And you need to document that and report it. Because we all know in the system, only as it's documented and reported, that maybe after enough times, sometimes it takes several times, we be able to act on it. So elder abuse is a huge thing.
I'm so glad you brought that up because it doesn't get talked about very much. We talk about child abuse, but we don't tend to talk about elder abuse, the signs of that, and folks keeping their eyes out for folks being either exploited or physically abused. What other aspects should folks be on the lookout for?
We've mentioned it, but that whole area relating to dementia. That is a growing concern at age 65. 1 in 10 individuals are experiencing some form of dementia. There are over 100 different conditions, diseases out there that all fall under that umbrella of what we refer to as dementia. At age 65, 1 in 10. Age 70, 2 in 10. Age 75, 3 in 10. Age 80, 4 in 10. At age 85, 1 out of every 2 individuals has some form of dementia. And some of our counties are already 1 in 3 individuals in the county are 65 and older. And you look around, how many of those, using those statistics, are experiencing some form of dementia, and maybe it hasn't even been diagnosed yet. They're noticing some things. And here's the thing about dementia. We just think about it being a cognitive issue of memory loss. Dementia is not memory loss. Memory loss can be one of the symptoms of dementia. But when we think about dementia, what is it attacking? Basically, with dementia, the brain is dying. What do we do with our brains? We smell with our brains. We figure out where to go with our brains. We look at things around us with our brains. We hear with our brains. We make sense of our environment with our brains. We do a lot of things. It affects our sleep. It tells us if we're hungry, if we're cold, if we're warm. It does all these things. So with dementia, that means the whole brain, or at least 2 parts of the brain, is being compromised and dying. And so when we think about that, for instance, again, we're not even talking about memory loss. Let's talk about sight. And earlier on, we talked about sight is one of the issues too, and we didn't even cover that in terms of vision loss. People are experiencing vision loss, and if you're at home, you take a Ziploc bag and hold it up in front of you, and take that. Some of you might have a prescription at home. How hard it is sometimes to read the instructions on the back of these medications. Yeah. When I had my son-in-law read one for me the other day, I thought, what is that saying?
Right?
Yeah. And now take that same bottle of medication and hold it up and try to read it through a Ziploc bag.
Yeah.
Okay. Looking through a Ziploc bag, what that sight that you see is still considered legally, you can legally drive with that. Okay. Now let's go over to dementia. Everybody at home, if you want to take your hands and move them up at a diving mask around your eyes, okay? Like those old blinders that a horse would have. And notice that you're not seeing to your left or right or even above. Early stages of dementia, that's their visual range. And they're out there driving, and say they're coming through an intersection. They don't see those cars coming for the left or right. And next thing, they have an accident, and you as law enforcement, you respond to that, the ticket's written and everything. But dementia has not been diagnosed. And they get a ticket, they maybe get a fine or whatever. I'm not exactly, you guys in law enforcement know what the consequences might be, but they may not have their license taken away because everybody can go through an intersection and get in an accident.
Right. Yeah.
Get an fender bender. And this person is not trying to hide anything. They don't realize that they can't see that. I was doing a training in the community at one point, and I shared this. There was an individual that took that train, and her eyes got big because she says, my mom just got in an accident. She says she didn't see any car coming, but she knew that she had been diagnosed with dementia. And the two and two came together for her. She said, oh, we're going to have to address this now.
Yeah.
So with that, early stages of dementia, again, 70% of them, they're living at home, have not even been diagnosed yet.
Yeah. And with the whole driving situation, what a loss of independence, too. I could see where that's a very difficult conversation. I remember having those conversations with my grandmother and how difficult that was.
Yeah. You're taking their freedom, their independence, their being able to go and see their friends, go to the grocery store, having just the day-to-day life interaction. We as a society, our communities are not designed to be able just to walk down and have access, say, to a grocery store or coffee shop just next door.
Yeah.
You have to drive to get there, or at least you may feel like you need to drive to get there. So there is that vision that, again, early stages, mid stage, we move to binocular. And then late stage, and of course, by this time, these individuals are usually in a care facility. It moves to monocular as far as their ability to see. So, again, think about in terms of those that you're working with, living with dementia. That's just sight. Let's move over to hearing. And all of us have had cell phones, and as we're listening to somebody, it breaks in and out. And we're picking up most of what they're saying, but maybe every fourth or fifth word, we're losing it. And you know how much that could change our understanding of the conversation?
Absolutely.
So with dementia, that's what's happening. Words are being lost. And then, of course, later in the disease, it becomes what I refer to as Charlie Brown teacher talk. And if you're older, you understand this is wah, 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 wah. That's what they're picking up.
So, what kind of accommodations should folks keep in mind? Is it talk slower, say things multiple times in different ways, ask for understanding?
You have to be in the visual range. You need to make sure when you approach individuals that you approach them in their visual range first before even having the conversation. And you need to do that outside, say, 5 to 6 feet. So that way you're not struggling. Because again, remember the visual, what their limitations. If you come up to them within a couple feet and all of a sudden you're right there, how are they going to react?
Right. That would give anybody a start.
Yeah. And so their amygdala, the boss there, is going to fright, flight, fight. And next thing, either they're running, they're cowering, or they're hitting back. And you go into restraint mode. And you didn't know. We talk about the physical positive approach. So you come outside that 6 foot range, you get into their visual range, and you raise your hand up to your face. You don't do a bunch of waving because it's if you're going fishing and you move that spinner out there, it draws that fish's attention. You don't want them drawing attention to your waving hand. You want to bring the attention to your face. And that's where you're communicating. Because, again, they may not be picking up on everything you're saying, but what are you communicating with your face? Is it friendly? Is it positive? You may have to take your glasses off if you're one of those officers that are wearing sunglasses so they can see your eyes.
Yeah.
You need to smile. And then you raise out your hand like you're going to shake hands. And here's the deal, too. When I was doing this training with law enforcement in one community and they were interacting with me, I'm a person living with dementia, and I'm just drawn to things that I'm curious about. I don't think about whether it's wrong or right. I started reaching for the officer's revolver.
Oh.
Because it looked cool. I'm a person living with dementia. It looks cool.
Right.
And I remember him saying to me, "Don't you touch that." And I just respond to him, "Then don't show it to me." I'm just like a curious kid. So first off, you reach out your hand and you introduce yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know their name, and that's the key too, because you be responding to a person that's wandering,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to reach out, you introduce yourself, and you say their name. And you might say, Harry, how are you? My name is Officer Winby.
Mm-hmm.
And you smile. And then you wait. You still stay outside that range. You wait for them because their processor is slowing down. It may take up to 30 seconds or more for them to receive that information that they're receiving, both visually in terms of what they're hearing and so on,
Mm-hmm.
process that, and respond back. So you have to wait. You have to sync your interactions with them to how they are interacting. You wait for them to respond back. And if they reach out their hand to shake hands with you, they're communicating with you. It's okay to come in. But if they don't, you stay out there and you
Mm-hmm.
interact there. And then how you stand is crucial then too.
Hmm.
There's a difference between what we refer to as supportive stance
Mm-hmm.
versus confrontational stance. Again, if you have that limited visual range
Mm-hmm.
and you're standing right in front of them, so all they're seeing is you,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
how would you feel? Would you feel trapped?
Oh, yeah.
What you do is you turn your shoulder slightly.
Mm-hmm.
You're still in their visual range, but you turn their shoulder slightly so they can see past you.
Hmm.
And that way, again, they may not cognitively be picking up that you are a aggressor or anything like that,
Mm-hmm.
but at some level mentally they are picking up on that. And when you turn, that lowers the temperature.
Right. Right. If someone has been victimized, if they're dealing with significant trauma, I mean, this is really good for folks to know that's trauma informed, whether this be first responders or if someone's coming to testify in court or being examined by attorneys. Like, this is all really great information to keep in mind to really de escalate that situation so the person can tell you their experience without having to fight the anxiety while
Exactly.
telling you that experience.
Exactly. And again, yeah, this type of thing, this applies to all of us. We're humans.
Right. Yeah.
And we need to be able to pick up on the messages that they're sending to us. So again, you turn and you provide that supportive stance and you have that conversation that way. Now, again, if they are reach out their hand, and again, this may be a wandering type of situation,
Mm-hmm.
reach out your hand, you come up alongside them and you do what's doing the hand under hand. It's not a straight handshake. It's difficult for us to talk about it on the air, but it's where their hands on top of your hand and you're supporting them.
Mm-hmm.
And so you come along, you reach across, and then you're on the opposite side of that hand as it
Mm-hmm.
reaches over to you, and you're supporting and you're having that conversation.
Rod, could you explain why it's helpful to hold someone's hand where you're supporting their hand versus the regular handshake?
Well, a couple different things. One is from their end, they're not feeling controlled, they're feeling supported. On the other hand, if they're feeling very vulnerable and feeling like they're not knowing what's going on, but they look to you as the person that's going to do all that for them,
Mm-hmm.
they may reach on to you and they're not going to let go. Next thing you know, you're having a tug of war.
Right.
So that's part of it. It allows you to provide that support and for them to
Mm-hmm.
sense that support. At the same time, it allows you to have that freedom too.
I see. Okay,
So
that makes sense.
that's key. But again, when you're responding to a person that's upset, so when you come to them and you see them and they may be yelling and screaming or saying some things that are way out there
Mm-hmm.
that aren't true, but the thing is, they think it is.
Right.
So it's important for you, first off, whatever they see as that threat, get that threat away.
Hmm.
Remove
Can you
that.
give an example?
For instance, they may see you or one of your fellow first responders or somebody as a threat. Maybe one of your colleagues have done something that's just made things worse. That person's focus is on them. They see them as a threat, and they can't listen to anything else while that threat is there.
It's a no-go conversation as
But
long as
no go
that person is there. There's no saying, hey, don't pay attention to them, pay attention to me, answer my questions. That's not going to happen.
Exactly.
I
And
see.
see,
Okay.
when you do that, all you're doing is supporting the fact that they have this threat and you're not supporting them in that. So you remove the threat, you acknowledge, you're seeing it from their eyes. You create that space of safety and you're on their side. You acknowledge it. You say, yeah, I understand. Get him out of there. Get him out of there. Actually, what you do is at the same level, and lots of times this is not, it doesn't seem right. You respond at the same level of emotion as they are.
Really?
If they think this is a 10 in terms of emotion, you need to show them because cognitively they're not understanding. Yeah, he is such a.
Really? That seems super counterintuitive when you're
Yeah,
thinking about crisis de-escalation.
you're supporting them with that emotion.
Interesting.
So you support them, say, yes, you're right.
Huh.
And then as the conversation goes along, your level of emotion is just slightly under theirs. And so
Interesting.
then you're bringing it down gradually. But you're communicating with them where maybe words can't communicate. You're communicating them with the emotion. You're connecting with them and that you're on their side. I've run into this even with some family members where they'll be sharing about how this situation was terrible and that person was terrible. And I quickly come in and say, you got to look at it from their perspective too.
Yeah, that's not going to go well.
And that's not what I want to hear from. I want to hear that you're mad about it too.
Right.
Okay, I need to stop with let's look at it from everybody's perspective here. And that person in crisis, they only have one perspective.
This is
And
really
there.
great because I think most folks think stay calm, don't get emotional, don't engage with the emotion because it will just increase the emotion. So this is a really interesting perspective.
So yeah, think of it being like a blown up balloon. You blow up that balloon to support them where they are, and then you gradually let out the air. But you got to blow up the balloon and support them there, and for them to feel comfortable enough to rest on that, and then you gradually let it out. Where they're feeling safe, they're feeling like they're being heard, their position is being supported. You're doing those things where, again, you remove that threat, you create that space, and you show them that you're on their side, but you also then get at their eye level too. You think about lots of times we're all standing here looking down at this person, or we're having conversations over here with somebody else. That person, a person living with dementia, every conversation, as far as they're concerned, is about them. So you get it down at their level, you're on their side, you get in that supportive stance, you do that hand under hand support, and then you can move in and have more of that conversation with them. But again, very few words, using a lot of visual cues. So if you're needing to help them move, you say, let's go this way. And remember their visual range, making sure that visual cue is in that range. Don't start moving right away. Remember, their response rate is slower. You've established that connection and you move with them at their pace. Because in addition to, again, maybe having cognitive challenges there, they could be having all the other older adult issues that we're talking about too. So another thing is as you're connecting with them, begin breathing in sync with them. And what that does on a subconscious level, both for you and for them, it helps you connect with where they are. And for them to be aware hey, this person's with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I have noticed this over the years prior to being in this position. I worked for over 30 years in the healthcare environment as a chaplain and as a hospice chaplain too.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed even individuals who were in the later stages of that journey and they weren't able to verbally communicate much.
Mm-hmm.
If I just sat there with them and breathed in sync with them, got connected, you begin picking up ways that they were communicating. It's like they know that you're there and
Yeah.
that you're supporting with them. And so when you then breathe in sync with them, then you can help them breathe. You help them access as they breathe, get a lot of those toxins out and help them access and be able to think more clearly as much as they can. And then, of course, you do that with a calm voice. So as you
Mm-hmm.
move from that high escalation, you're moving down and you're calm and a relaxed body. They're picking up on all that. So again, doing that first visually, then with words, then with touch.
And the verbal, I'm assuming, short,
Yep.
simple,
Very,
not like multiple things in one sentence.
yeah.
Okay.
And I coach middle school track and cross country too. I find that same principle applies with middle school kids too.
Mm-hmm.
If you use a lot of words, they don't hear it. They'll maybe hear your last word.
Right.
Okay. A person that's in crisis, a person that's living with dementia, very few words. And making sure that they're understanding that command before you move on to something else or suggestion. So then lastly, you need to be able to attend to that person's needs and show that you are sensitive to whatever their needs are. We've talked
Yeah.
about earlier for them to feel safe, but if they're in crisis too, they may feel thirsty, they may feel cold. For you, as you have your detective hat on, what is this person needing?
Yeah.
And who's attending to those needs? And it's not about us as first responders.
Mm-hmm.
We just want to contain, maybe. It's about that person attending to those needs and being able to go where he or she is. What are the needs of a terrified, trapped person?
Yeah.
So, all those things, not in a particular order necessarily, but all at the same time.
That is a lot for folks to keep in the back of their minds when chatting with folks. And it's something that we're going to have to be doing more and more as our population ages.
Because
I've
all of us,
already,
yeah, all of
yeah,
us are going to know someone that's living with dementia.
absolutely. Absolutely. I was just sitting with that. How scary that must be for someone.
Yeah. And it's a big concern for older adults too.
Yeah.
Those that aren't even living with dementia, because older adults that are 65 and older, their number one health concern is not cancer, it's not heart disease, it's not diabetes or influenza or anything else. It's whether or not I may experience dementia.
Yeah.
That's the number one concern. That's the fear, that they're having.
And an understandable fear.
Yeah, yeah.
I can feel the anxiety within myself in this conversation, thinking about I'm going to age and at some point that could be my reality. And I also think about my loved ones and the
Mhm.
reality with them. I mean, an absolutely understandable fear for folks, how scary that must be.
So, can we do anything about that?
Yeah, I'm curious. Yes, that's my next question.
And there are a lot of smart people out there. They're doing studies. Oh, first off, if you actually experience dementia, again, two parts of the brain are dying.
Mm-hmm.
It is chronic. In other words, you can't just take a bunch of pills or do something that's just going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
It's progressive and it's terminal. That's the four truths about dementia. However, there are some can you do anything about heart disease?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can you do anything about the possibility of getting cancer? Sometimes it's in our genes and certain things we're going to get. But when it comes to cognitive decline, what they have shown, there are some things that we can do that are helpful. And so, amongst those things, and it makes perfectly sense, what's good for the heart is
Mm-hmm.
good for the brain. So, when you think about it, what do we do? What are we eating?
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to eat a bunch of processed food.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We want to eat lots of vegetables, lots of things like beans, some chicken, some fish.
The other thing that I've heard is that even if you have a genetic predisposition, if you keep yourself cognitively busy and engaged, that even if you have a genetic predisposition for Alzheimer's, you may still get Alzheimer's, but you won't have the slow decline like you would usually see. It'll be a pretty steep, quick decline at the end versus the really slow one, is one of the studies I saw on why it's so important to stay cognitively engaged throughout life. Is that
Yep.
accurate?
Yes, there's a lot of truth to that. And so, in addition to what you eat, makes
Mm-hmm.
a difference. And one of the writers says that we talk about diabetes,
Mm-hmm.
type 1, type 2. Well,
Mm-hmm.
they say that type 3 type of diabetes is actually dementia.
Really?
And again, it's eating a lot of sugar, things
Mm-hmm.
like that, so it makes us more susceptible. So, getting back to what you're talking about, one of the things they say is it's important for you to remain curious. What they've shown is that the two individuals they did autopsies on.
Mm-hmm.
And when they did the autopsies on the brains, again, the brains they've had, say, Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that both these individuals had Alzheimer's. But where one was showing all the symptoms of it,
Mm-hmm.
the other one showed very few symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
What was going on there? And what they said is because the other one had more what they refer to as cognitive reserve.
Hmm.
And what that meant was, think about right now, we're creatures of habit and routine.
Mm-hmm.
When we get up in the morning, those of us that are working virtually may not drive to work anymore, but say you had a place in town that you would drive to work to.
Mm-hmm.
How many different routes would you take?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
It would go the same route all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yet at the same time, if you thought about it, there's multiple different ways of getting to that same place, but we don't
Mm-hmm.
take them. We've got those synaptic relay highways that we have set up where we go all the time because then we don't have to think about it.
Right.
We don't have to engage that brain. But that they show is individuals who maybe I like music and it's just this kind of music I like all the time. That's what I listen to. Maybe you have engaged in other types of music
Mm-hmm.
or maybe learn how to play another instrument
Mm-hmm.
or learn another language
Mm-hmm.
or pick up a different hobby, all those sorts of things. What that does, it creates new synaptic relays
Mm-hmm.
between those neurons that are developed in your brain so that if you begin to experience, say, Alzheimer's, and this
Mm-hmm.
one synaptic relay is compromised, you still have another synaptic relay to access that same information.
That makes sense.
So, being curious, always learning new things, doing different activities is key. So, being curious, eating the right foods,
Mm-hmm.
movement is huge. Our bodies were designed and made to move.
Mm-hmm.
They were not made to just sit.
Yes.
So what they show is we need to get up and move around at least 5 to 10 minutes every hour.
Hmm.
And we need to get up and get a sweat up
Mm-hmm.
at least 20 minutes to 40 minutes every day.
Yeah.
So they show that movement is a key thing to keeping a healthy brain. Nutrition is a key thing. Being curious is a key thing. Connection is a key thing. And we talked about that earlier on with how the pandemic limited that connection.
Yes.
So it's key to help keeping that at bay, if you will, by always connecting, finding relationships. Studies have shown over and over again individuals that have multiple connections, multiple social connections, there's a lesser chance of cognitive decline. So being connected and having those relationships. So think about maybe that older adult going out for a walk with them and connecting with them. So
Yeah.
you're getting that physical activity and you're connecting with them as well. And of course, self-care is a huge thing. Making sure you're taking care of yourself, making sure that you're brushing your teeth. Good oral health care directly has an impact on the brain because if you get infections, it affects brain health.
I've heard that it also impacts heart health too.
Yes, what's healthy for the heart is healthy
Yeah,
for the
healthy for
brain.
the brain. Mm-hmm.
And you think about older adults and struggles with dental health, and if they don't have a good dental plan for themselves.
Yeah.
The disparity in terms of healthcare, I know we have Medicare, but when we talk about mental health and access to, say, your local behavioral health, Medicare only pays for an older adult to see a provider if there is a clinical social worker on staff.
Really?
That was something set up federally
Mm-hmm.
that needs to change. A lot of local health care providers will still try to work in where an older adult needs to see someone. But when we talked about the statistics earlier,
Mm-hmm.
with the number of older adults we have in our community, as well as all the other individuals that may have behavioral health needs,
Mm-hmm.
where are they going to fit those few slots if they don't have a clinical social worker to provide the counseling? Now, there's a lot of other qualified professional health providers that are out there as far as mental health, but it's written into law right now only a clinical social worker. Social workers are not abundant.
No, and they're becoming less abundant all the time.
Exactly. And so
Mm-hmm.
if going into a rural setting too, what's the chances of that person getting help that way? So that's a whole nother topic that needs to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
Not to be a big book promoter, but one book I would really recommend is the one called Keep Sharp by Sanjay Gupta.
Mm-hmm.
He's a neurosurgeon, so he
Mm-hmm.
knows a little bit something about the brain.
Right.
And he's written a book on build a better brain at any age. And a lot of things we just talked about is in that book.
Oh, I'll have to check it out. Oh, and
Yeah.
we'll put a link to it in the show notes so people can find it.
And I first listened to it on Audible,
Mm-hmm.
and because I liked it so much, he's very good about sourcing his information. I end up getting a hard copy, and I reference that, as you've heard today, in the training that I do, because it's good stuff. And again, older adults, the biggest fear that they have is getting dementia.
Yeah.
And they say, is there anything I can do about it? And I said, there is. There are some things you can do. Whether you're going to stop eating, confess I like those hot tamales. Eating a whole box of them at one setting may not be good for you.
But go for a walk.
Yeah, go
Do
for a
some
walk.
crossword. Do some crossword puzzles.
But
Pick-
and I would say, just do crossword. Be curious.
Yeah.
Make your brain work in other ways that it hasn't worked. You may be really good at crossword puzzles. You need to pick up something else.
I am glad to hear that there's a benefit to me being a curious human being with a million hobbies. So this is good to hear. This is heartening for me that there are definitely things that we can do. The other thing that I've heard is around the whole issue with falling and balance because our connections in our feet decrease the nerve endings, and so we're more likely to fall. And so the importance of not only exercising but practicing balance, particularly as you're aging, not just when you're older.
Yep, that is crucial. One of the things you mentioned is, as older adults, that peripheral neuropathy that
Mm-hmm.
occurs too. where they may not be able to sense or feel things as well, whether their feet or their hands picking up on maybe something that is dangerous to the touch. So that is a whole nother area as well. But yeah, it definitely affects that muscle weakness and difficulty walking and moving and so on. It is important for older adults to be very intentional about movement and exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, maybe it doesn't happen as quickly as we like it, but fortunately, our bodies respond to what we do
Mm-hmm.
in a negative way and in a positive way.
Right.
If we get out there, they say if you don't use it, you lose it. If you use it, it comes back too. Maybe you won't be able to run as fast as you used to run, but you could still move.
Absolutely. I don't know if I told you this. During the pandemic, I started taking online ballet lessons.
Ah,
And I was a ballerina from like age 4 up into my teens, and then I danced pretty much my whole life. But I hadn't done ballet in a really long time. There's lots of ballet I can't do. I'm not going up on point anymore. I'm not doing that to myself. So I started doing ballet again, and it was interesting because I don't feel like I'm 45, but my body knows I'm 45. It don't do things like it did when I was a teenager. But it's interesting how much of it came back,
yeah.
not to the level that I could do when I was younger, but how much it came back to me, and then the strength that I ended up building up that I wasn't getting by doing other types of exercise, and how good that was for me to be able to do that again. But it was really interesting. I was talking to my teacher, and I think he's like 21. So he's still in the he can do anything stage. And I was like, my body used to know how to do this, and my brain knows I know how to do this, but my body just won't cooperate. And it's so frustrating. But yeah, it has been really good for me and my balance. So I think that's been a good reminder for me on you can go back, you can't go all the way home, but at least your body will remember, and you may have to modify a little bit.
And that's key because our memory can be dangerous. We
Yeah.
think, I used to be able to do that. I should be able to do it now. And we end up overdoing it. And again,
Mm-hmm.
our bodies do not bounce back the way it used to.
Mm-mm.
End up overdoing it. And we could injure ourselves in ways that could be very detrimental.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned earlier, I used to work at the hospital. And during hunting season with elk in this area, even a lot of the pastors find somebody else to cover the pulpit while they're out hunting.
Right.
How many times we would see hunters coming into ED with heart issues
Oh.
because they used to go up into the mountains we have here and trudge around all day and do just fine. But you know what? They're getting a little older and they weren't out getting those walks in and exercising all throughout the week. We know individuals that when they're younger, they may go out on that fun run or that road race and do a 5K and they hadn't done any training at all. And it may have not been pretty, but they were able to do it. Uh,
Right.
you try to do that when you're older and hadn't done anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
We could be taking you to the hospital.
Right.
So you have to be patient with yourself. You have to listen. But a lot of that can come back.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not, again, not the level that it used to be, but it will come back.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that we need to mention about connection and activity, again, being curious and having purpose. People need to find something that gives them purpose and meaning, no matter who you are.
Yeah.
But when you're an older adult, maybe you've relied on that job to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I've told my wife, and at some point we will retire. All of us will, hopefully. I said, next number of years, we need to start practicing retiring,
Mm-hmm.
finding those things that give us meaning and purpose in terms of our activities and all those sorts of things before we shift from the occupations that we're in right now. Because
Yeah.
if we don't have that, again, I noticed in the hospital many times, particularly men, who would retire within a year or two. They would show up in the ED.
Yeah.
Because their health deteriorated, their mental health deteriorated, and they were there. And so, in fact, they've shown in studies that early retirement is not necessarily a healthy thing.
Interesting.
And what is he saying, that all of us need to do that 9 to 5 job? He's not saying that. If you are going to shift from that career that you're a part of, you need to make sure you are still finding something that works that brain, that keeps you curious, that gives you something meaningful to be a part of every day.
That makes sense.
We need to have a meaning and purpose. And so oftentimes in our society, we regulate our older adults to the sideline.
Yeah.
And older adults need to continue to find that meaning and purpose every day, whether it is even just to check in with another neighbor, to be that a watchman for their neighborhood. Even though that could be irritating at times, hey, I'm glad that they're there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
To have that conversation where there's a term that the Celts used to say, to be our anakara. Back before Christian times, in that society, they had individuals that they're called anakaras, which was translated soul friend. So these people that would have to be a little bit longer in life, that experience that life experience, you would have that person that you would check in with on a regular basis, and they would just listen. They would say to you, Chris, how are you within today? How are things going? And just let you talk.
Yeah.
And as you did, you may talk about all the things that are going well, but you may also bring up the things that are not.
Right.
And they wouldn't necessarily, well, you need to do this. They would just simply listen, reflect back. And lots of times you would come up with the answer. Maybe I need to not do that job anymore. Maybe I need to reconcile with this person over here. And that's the role that these individuals play. We need to have that in our society.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful role that our older adults can be in. And those families, they're fortunate to have multiple generations to interact with, are blessed with that. You know, my family, I still have my mother, stepfather on one side, and my in-laws on the other side. They're both in the 80-ish range, but they have their children, their grandchildren, and their great-grandchildren now that are interacting with them, and that they go to. When they're feeling dark, they just need to go over to grandma's house. You know,
Yep.
that sort of thing. So
Yep.
important meaning and purpose in life. So we cover one other thing here when we talk about spiritual health of individuals. There's 4 areas of spiritual health that apply to all of us. But as we get older in life, a lot of those things, it rises to the surface even more. And that's meaning. Got to have meaning. Forgiveness. We call the pain of loss of forgiveness in relationship the common cold of spiritual pain. Everybody has relationships with people that we have to forgive each other. And if we don't, what happens?
It festers.
It festers. It gets worse. Sometimes it goes multi-generational, and you don't even know why we don't talk to that side of the family.
Right.
Right?
Right. Right. There's something about a tree like 20 years ago. Yeah.
And if you try to have a conversation with that side of the family about it, they would go, what are you talking about?
Right.
So there's forgiveness. Then there's connection, relatedness. Is that person, place, or thing, are you connected with what is most important to you or not? And that's those loss issues. And then there's hope. If you don't have hope for tomorrow, we call that the terminal illness of spiritual pain. And of course, we talked about earlier about suicide rates going up. And again, when we are younger and we're so busy to even think because we're so busy with our jobs, a lot of the issues relating to meaning, forgiveness, connection, and hope that maybe we don't address and gets pushed under the rug.
Mm-hmm.
Now we don't have all those routines to distract us. And they all begin bubbling to the surface.
Mm.
And that's where, if you're a connection with an older adult, you can listen. You could be that anam-cara to them. And you can say, I notice you talk a lot about Aunt such and such.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that. Without any judgment.
Mm-hmm.
It's support rather than judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And providing that space for them to just share. Finding ways to let go.
Yeah.
Because that quote I said earlier about pain that's not transformed is transmitted.
Mm-hmm.
Spiritual pain that is not transformed is transmitted.
Hmm.
Shows up in all sorts of physical ailments, problems with the heart, problems with chronic pain. If, for instance, if you have a toothache or whatever, a backache or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and you just got done having a fight with someone that you really care about, how does that toothache and backache feel?
Right.
It's transmitted through that.
Mm-hmm.
It's your body way saying, you need to pay attention. So it is with older adult. Lots of things that go on for all of us, but it becomes more prominent maybe as you get older. But all those old adults that have worked through all that
Mm-hmm.
and realize that 9 to 5 job that you think is so important, they'll let you know that's really not that important. It's
Right.
much more to life. And they can be that source of support for you, that car to you.
Well, I think that is a beautiful place for us to end. Any last thoughts for our listeners before we end? I want to give that opportunity.
Just cherish and recognize those older adults around you. See that there's a great resource to you.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just maybe that call that you have to go on all the time, that they keep on calling. Their life witness can teach you something, but also what's going on with them for you to be curious, put that detective hat on to say, okay, what else is going on here? That if I just take the time to listen,
Mm.
I can pick up on. It might be one less call.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thinking about it as that call might be around connection and how else to help that person get connection versus calling you.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
You're the only person that responds.
Yeah. And how sad is that?
Yeah, you're their family.
It's interesting to talk about this, though, because it's a conversation that we do have and have had before around folks that continuously call. Either they're calling because they're scared of their health issues and they think that they may be having a heart attack or other reasons. And a punishment answer isn't going to do you any good, right? You can't jail someone out of that behavior or fine someone out of that behavior. So thinking about the root cause of why that is happening and then addressing that root cause may go farther into stopping that behavior
Yep,
than our traditional approaches.
yep, yep. And that's where, again, working as a team, maybe working with your local behavioral health as well and getting involved. Because, again, we talked about dementia earlier. They may not remember they called you about. And lots of times in early stages of dementia, they're beginning to sense something's not right, but they
Yeah.
cannot put a finger to it. So what do? They call you.
Yeah, because they're scared.
Yeah, they're scared. And of course, we do know anxiety levels rise with older adults. Of course, they're faced with the reality that all of us are experiencing, whether we acknowledge it or not, that we're not in control.
Mm-hmm.
Things happen that are beyond our control.
Mm-hmm.
All those things are going on, and be able to begin to identify maybe there's something else going on here than what they just stated.
Yeah. That's an excellent reminder.
Yeah. And if we just take a little bit extra time, communicate with our other community partners, whether it's the AAA or the behavioral health or APD, whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can address this before it gets worse.
Yes.
And we don't have to bring them in on a code.
Collaboration and connection is key.
Yeah, exactly. And there's older adult behavioral health specialists in your area. They're available for resources. Please feel free to reach out to them.
How would they find the specialists in their area? Is there a website or?
Yes, it's Oregon BHI.
OregonBHI.org. That will be a wonderful resource for folks. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And we'll make sure that that website's in the show notes so you all don't have to go looking for it or listen to that part of the podcast. I know, at least for me, I have to listen to that part of the podcast a couple times to write it down. So we will put the website and then also that book in the show notes that Rod talked about so folks can have access to that.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Rod. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you for your time.
And thank you for having me talking about this important topic.
I appreciate you taking the time because we don't talk about older adults and what folks are dealing with, and probably some of the fear out of what we will be dealing with. So I appreciate your time and helping us shed light on this topic. So thank you.
You're welcome. Have a wonderful day.
You too. The Center Collaborative is a production of the Oregon Center on Behavioral Health and Justice Integration, a specialized division of Greater Oregon Behavioral Health Incorporated. It is produced by me, Chris Thomas, with production assistance from Patrick Kennedy. Music by Patrick Mulvihill and Patrick Kennedy. Subscribe to the Center Perspective using your favorite app. To learn more about criminal justice and behavioral health in Oregon, visit the Center's website at ocbhji.org. You can also find us on Facebook. We'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to us. Join us next time as we chat with the experts about programs and partnerships at work within this complex and yet compelling field.